Hello and welcome to the show. Now, last couple of weeks we've been focusing on things that affect your health in a positive way. Part of that is chatting to a homeopath. I've got Dr. Fatima Paruk with me in the Durban studio, and we're chatting about homeopathy and how that may just affect your health in a positive way. Assalamu alaikum, Fatima. Welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, we've looked at this concept of homeopathy, and I only got to pronounce it right recently, and it's become a widespread phenomenon. And it's very interesting to see people like yourself getting very involved with that kind of thing. I've looked at some of your CV and stuff like that, and I see a very intense involvement. But before we go to understand homeopathy, we sort of need to understand you as Fatima. What led you to pursue a career in this field?
I was always very interested in going into health, but I wasn't quite sure what kind of health. And it kind of happened that I had met a few people who had gone overseas, GPs, a few pediatricians who had gone over and done some courses in homeopathy and came back and said to me, if you're going to pursue a career in this kind of field, consider homeopathy because it's really up and coming. And this was maybe 15 years ago. And I did a little bit of research. I liked what I was seeing because I was seeing something different from the norm. I was seeing a system of medicine that considered a patient as being a whole person as opposed to just being somebody with a certain problem. And the more I got involved in it, the more I really enjoyed it and decided definitely to go and pursue it further.
So now that you've got into it, do you feel you've made the right choice and do you enjoy that?
Oh, definitely. It's very rewarding. It's not something that I find difficult in any way. I find it very challenging, definitely in these times, to try and treat people effectively. Also, the kind of results you get, especially when you treat kiddies and people with chronic diseases that have had diseases for a long time, it really gives you back, what you've been looking for, kind of food for the soul, if you can say that.
Of course. Now, I think the term homeopathy for many people is associated with natural medicine and techniques or whatever it may be. But the actual definition as per a practitioner like yourself, what do you define that as?
Homeopathy for me is a system of medicine that considers a person as a whole. That's the first and foremost point because that's very different from an allopathic approach, which is a very mechanical view of individualized problems. So when a patient comes in and they speak about their problem, I not only ask about their physical condition, but I need to know where you are in terms of your emotional being, what's bothering you. Psychosomatic illness is probably one of the biggest things that we face today. And so mental and emotional well-being is very, very important. And that for me defines homeopathy, as looking at a person as a whole and definitely as an individual. Also noting that no two people with the same disease, let's say flu for example, present in exactly the same way. I mean, we're all different. Our etiologies are different. The cause of our disease is different and how we respond to disease is different. So that for me defines homeopathy as a completely different approach to looking at medicine, understanding disease, and then effectively treating it as such.
You speak about this concept of treating things as a whole. And so we know that you are referring to issues like the emotional quotient being part of that. And then you're talking about maybe external environmental factors. So are you saying that homeopathy, I'm trying to understand this, is a look at all those factors to try and understand why someone has got something and then find a way to treat that, where perhaps your normal GP is saying that got the flu, so symptomatic relief would be to take Flutex and that would take away the sneeze and the cold. I'm just saying, is that what you're really saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. You've got it 100% correctly. There are many factors that interfere with our health and our wellness, and all of them have to be considered. Each individual's own disposition themselves, the way you respond to disease also has to be considered. If you say to me, look, I always respond this way, I always have a runny nose, and then I get a headache, and then I get a flu. Patterns are very important in homeopathy, so we explore those quite in depth when a patient comes in. And it's very important for us in terms of treatment because we base a lot of our treatment on how a patient responds and their predisposition, as you outlined.
We find a very interesting trend, and this is something that I assumed. And just before the show, I spoke to you about this. We find that I think we had to come from natural medicine throughout time, and then we went into all this medication we find today on the shelves are pharmacies, and I think they do that. They have their place, but we'll talk about that a bit later on. And now we find again, we have lots of people going out and saying that I'm not sure if it's the color green that got us saying we need to get more natural again, and all these other medication. Too much of them is causing kidney problems and all those kind of things going on. So we find natural down to a mixture, or rather going into full-time pathogenic, I think, and then from there saying, now let's go back to natural medicine, and a sector of the populace saying that. That progression, what do you attribute that to? Because that's an interesting cycle that we see happening there.
It's a very interesting cycle. I would say early on in the early 1900s, homeopathy was pretty rife in most parts of the world, probably not Africa, but definitely Europe and America. And it was because homeopaths got such good results with epidemics, chronic epidemics that were rife at that particular time, that were actually cleaning out populations. Things like typhoid fever, scarlet fever, and homeopaths did very well in treating those epidemics. So it became very, very popular. Subsequent to that, as you said, allopathic medication took over, and we've had the paradigm now of only allopathic medication in treatment. But people are becoming a bit despondent lately and noticing that, as you said, too much of any medication causes kidney problems, liver problems, that kind of thing. And they're noticing that this change in the type of medication is actually adversely affecting them. Over certain generations, we see a trend also of the body not being able to manage or properly facilitate those medications and excrete them properly. And you're left with the remnants of that then in the system, which can lead to other complications. So people are also becoming very, very health conscious, and they're looking for a natural way and a natural approach to medicine, first do no harm kind of approach. And just generally, I think the atmosphere is very much more health conscious, and so people are looking for alternatives. Homeopathy is one of those alternatives. Obviously, there are lots of others as well to explore in the allied health professionals kind of umbrella.
We find a situation, so serious headache, and there you go, when you take this grandpa, for example, and after the grandpa, yes, works very well, takes the headache away, and once your headache is gone, you don't worry about what has caused the headache, so you go from one headache to another one, and that's where you take another grandpa and that sort of thing. Is the homeopathic approach to that different? Because understand that in my view, and as a non-medical professional, I'm finding that I'm taking the grandpa, for example, saying that solves the headache, but the headache might be indicative of something else, and I know that. But I'm not going to that part. I'm solving the problem now because I need to move on with my life, get the next headache later and move on with my life again. Does homeopathy determine other techniques here, saying that let's find the root cause of what's going on here?
That's exactly right. You've got it 100% correctly. So symptoms of disease are always an indication, or rather a red light, for something else that's happening within your system. Headaches don't happen without a cause. They're a physical kind of manifestation, and they definitely have a cause. So any symptom in your body, we have to go in and look for the cause. And the way of treating it is not to just treat the symptom that's apparent, but to actually treat the system in its entirety and fix the internal problem so that the headaches disappear. It's kind of like fever as well. Fever is an indication that there's some kind of infection. So if you just treat the fever continuously with paracetamol, what's going to happen? It'll go away as long as you're treating it, but it doesn't make the underlying bacterial infection disappear because you haven't touched that, you haven't treated it, So it's about treating on the surface or treating from deep within and getting a response from your body. And what homeopathy does very well is it actually goes in to stimulate your own immune system to then make those corrective changes within your body and, get rid of those symptoms over time.
But this obviously means that the homeopathic approach is an approach that takes longer to solve a problem. Am I correct in saying that? Because I know my dad was going out recently trying to solve all kinds of issues that he had going on, whatever they might be. And going to the hospital, they give you something that sort of inhibits the problem right now. But when he's on treatment with a homeopath, he's been getting results. I'm not going into what the issue was, but he's getting the results, but it's taking a bit longer. Is that the natural course with regards to this particular field?
It is generally what happens, and the reason is, obviously, if you consider, people tend to go to allopaths first, treat their problem, on several courses of this or that, and then they end up at the homeopath. So there's a lot that we've got to work through before we actually hit the crux of it. We've got to work through
Just cleaning out the weeds
yeah,
first and
exactly.
then moving on.
We've
Yes.
got to do the weeding first and then get to the actual plant and soil. So what happens is it does tend to take a little longer. Also, people need to understand there's two types of disease. There's acute disease and chronic disease. In acute disease, you know, your blood pressure is raised, your system is moving at a faster pace because it's trying to ward off a certain disease. And then homeopathics are received and they're processed a lot faster because your metabolic rate is raised. But in chronic disease, where you're not working with an active immune system, it takes a little bit longer to get the medications going, to start invoking those changes. And the other very important thing to mention here is that we're working via the immune system, your own immune system. So the state of health of your immune system determines how fast or how slowly changes appear to you in a visible or measurable way. If you've got an immune system that's been dealing with chronic disease for a long, long time, it's kind of like an engine that's not working very well. So obviously it takes time to pick up to a certain speed. But if you've got, let's say, a child or somebody that hasn't been exposed to lots of medications or doesn't have chronic disease, the medications tend to work very fast. In terms of chronic disease, people often come and say, you know, I've had this problem for so many years. So make your goals realistic as well. If you've suffered from something for 6 or 8 years or 10 years, don't expect it to go away in 2 weeks.
I think it's a very pertinent point.
Yeah. Considering what we're trying to do, we're not just trying to remove the symptom. Trying to remove the symptom, you can get the symptom gone in 2 days. But if you're trying to reverse a disease process that has been infestated in your body for a certain amount of time, you've got to reteach organs, you've got to reteach your circulatory system how to deal with it and how to go back and make the corrections it needs to. So you do have to be realistic in terms of your time frame.
Correct. Now, is there a relation between your normal medical society out there that's going and treating people with the normal medication that we find and homeopaths? Do you find a link between the two? Can patients that have an X problem, I don't know what it might be, maybe it's different for all kinds of problems, say that I'm going to use a little bit of that approach in association with your approach, or does the two clash altogether?
I don't think they clash. They don't clash.
Are they complementary then in your view?
In my opinion, they are definitely complementary. And I think no one system of medicine can fix all problems. I think each person's individual, as I said, and conditions require a bit of both. You know, we know allopathic medication itself can't cure everything. There's lots of diseases that people walk around with and they're told, look, listen, you're going to have to live with it, or you'll have to take this such and such medication for the rest of your lifespan. But if you put the two together, I think you get a nice approach. In terms of symptoms that are very debilitating for a patient, they can take the allopathic medication and, live well with it. And an underlying, you can use homeopathics to try and support the immune system and, create a general sense of wellness over time. And the more you use the homeopathics, obviously, the more your immune system is restored to natural health or back to its original position.
Correct, yes. Like there are grey areas with normal medication, which you're speaking about now, saying that patients are sent home because it's either a lifelong problem and it cannot be solved in that way, or there's medication that you need to live with. Does that happen with homeopathy at the same time? Are there those grey areas that we're talking about?
Not too much. Generally with homeopathics, it's...
I mean, you cannot stake claim to the fact that you can solve all problems. Mm-hmm. But is that margin lower?
I think it's lower depending on how you use it. The problem we have a lot of the time is that people are not very familiar with it. People don't use it in the right way. If used correctly, yes, I think the margin is lower.
So, and then patients are impatient.
Patients are pretty impatient, yeah, they are, and they're pretty non-compliant also. But can you blame them? They've come from a different system of medicine, and now they've been told to take medicines differently, to use them in a different way. They've been told that the effects are different. I mean, they completely look different. I'm sure you've seen homeopathic medications. So it's a new system for a lot of patients. Those that do stick to it and get used to it find that it works perfectly well, and they never need much else throughout their lifetime. But compliance is a big problem. Understanding is a big problem. So
do you see that changing
that,
within the context of South Africa and where we find ourselves with our health system in South Africa and what South Africans are used to at the moment? Do you see that changing perhaps? Do you see people moving more and more towards natural medication? And are they being more receptive? Are they getting the results, so therefore they're more receptive? I'm not sure.
Well, there's two parts to that question, in public sector and private sector. In the private sector, definitely, people have been seeking homeopathics a lot more than previously. And I say this from having studied over 10 years ago. And when I started studying, people couldn't pronounce the word. People are well informed, they know what it is at least now, they're happy to take over-the-counter medications. Not all of them will go and seek homeopathic care, but now and then when they don't get any joy from maybe a GP or their local doctor, then they might pop into homeopath. So there is a trend and it is picking up. I feel the demand is definitely here. In the public sector, there's two problems. It works very well in terms of how people receive it and how it works in rural settings. People are more compliant. And for some reason, we seem to be getting very, very good results in rural settings. But we cannot break the barrier in terms of getting into rural clinics and establishing ourselves there because of legislation and red tape, as you would probably understand.
Correct, yes. Now, we see something funny happening. So we take a little pill, a normal, whatever they call it for flu and whatever you say, you go to the chemist and you buy this thing. And we understand that that's made up of a bunch of chemicals reacting in a certain way to cause a certain reaction in the brain or wherever it might be in the blood, wherever it is. The medication on your side, what is it derivative of? Is it plants? Is it, I don't know, I'm trying to just find out what is it derivative of?
Okay, so...
And how was the determinations made? I know this might be difficult for you, but how was the determinations made that that plant was the source of that? To solve that. I'm just trying to get the chemical balance in that.
I'll answer that question first and then the other one later. So basically, homeopathy was developed by a German physician and a chemist. And he practiced medicine and became quite despondent with it because he found that a lot of the techniques he was taught and treatment methods...
So you're saying the founder of homeopathy came from a normal medical background?
Yes.
That's interesting.
He was a German guy, a physician and a chemist. He was fluent in many languages. And he just found that, people were coming, having treatment and going away, not actually getting cured. They would either come back with the same condition a little while later or something new would develop, but they were not in a state of health after treatment. So he became quite despondent, stopped practicing for a long time, and started translating medical texts. And he came over the toxicological report of something called quinine, which is a medication that we use for treatment of normal allopathic malaria. And in the toxicological report of quinine, he noticed that the symptomology of the toxicity of quinine matched the symptomology of malaria in a patient. And he attributed this not entirely to coincidence, but that it actually gave us an insight into what that particular substance can treat in an ill person. So he further explored this idea and he started proving remedies. And by that, he gave small doses of what's considered toxic medications to patients, and they produced a symptom picture, and then he matched that to disease. So basically what we do is match your symptom picture to a substance that can produce the same kind of symptoms when taken in high doses.
I think that understands, yes, of course. We find a situation today that with the pricing on medications, and we understand that whenever you're going to get sick, the thing that might make you more sick is the fact that what the price is going to be. So there's a consultation and the medication to follow and the treatment. And sometimes people stress about those things, and I suppose the emotional quotient goes down there. But with that in mind, how does the medical aids and those kind of people that sit there today saying that, you know what, we're taking your money every month, do they play the game with homeopaths saying that we are also going to be paying for certain medications that you might be issuing? Because I know that homeopathic medication might not also be the cheapest medication around.
It can be quite expensive. It depends on what you're dispensing. General homeopathics are relatively cheap, and that's why we've been pushing quite a bit to get into public healthcare, because it is something cheap for the government to fund. Most of the medical aid schemes recognize homeopaths. They'll pay for your consultation, they'll pay for medication. As long as it's coded properly and you're using, things that are from reputable pharmaceutical companies, you generally shouldn't have a problem. Where it's not actually made by homeopath, and you know that most homeopaths make their own medication, there's certain codes for that, and it's not made by homeopath. We have NAPI codes and things that we put on your little receipt, and most of your medical aid schemes will cover it. But it also is very dependent on the type of scheme you have, whether it's full cover, hospital cover, obviously that kind of thing, and
Of
whether it
course.
comes out of your savings or not. But by and large, there is definitely a coding system in place for homeopathics. I know some other allied health professionals do battle a little bit in terms of coding and things, but we were lucky enough about 4 or 5 years ago, everything got coded for homeopath. So
Okay, I think
we've got
that's
no
good
issues.
news.
Yeah.
Going forward into the future, where do you see the field going? And are there any more advances in terms of new medications and new approaches to problems that may arise in patients?
I think going forward in the future, what we look forward to is an integrated medical approach where we can actually have allopaths and homeopaths or other healthcare professionals standing together in order to treat the patient, to the best available opportunity, depending on their illness, of course. But it would be nice if people could put their heads together instead of staying on completely different avenues and treating completely independently.
In the interest of a patient's health, of course.
Of course, and I did say to you, in Dubai, that's the way we practice. We had a group of about 8 people, different professionals in the health field, and everyone looked at the case, and there was inter-referrals, which was very easy because everyone understood each other's field. So I think that's also the next thing that, general medical practitioners need to know what's out there in terms of allied healthcare, because sooner or later your patient's going to come saying, I've taken this and that, and you need to know what it is if you're treating a patient and taking care of them.
Of
But
course.
integrated medicine is definitely the next thing
The
that's
next
coming
move that
up.
needs
Yes,
to be happening.
yes.
Fatima, your advice to youth out there that maybe wants to follow your field. I think that people are, when they're thinking about medicine and healthcare, they are only thinking about medical school as per se, the way they know it. But and it's difficult sometimes to get in because there's lots of quotes around that. But you can still get into the field via what you're doing and still go out there and help those patients and people that you want to help.
Definitely.
What's your advice to them?
My advice is that if you are interested in healthcare, don't stop. There's lots of different options for you. Medicine is not the only one. There's lots of little fields in medicine that you can get out there. You can get into public healthcare clinics and make a difference if that's what you want to do. Do consider that all medical fields obviously start off with basic medicine and then they branch off into whatever your profession might be. But it's definitely the way to go, and it's always very rewarding to give back to the community. So anyone that ventures into the field, please make it your duty to give back in some way at whatever stage in your career, to try and give back to the community. We've got a large community here that needs the help.
Of course. Now, we're not going to go a lot into this last section that I want to speak about for the next 2 minutes. And that is, I know that you're in discussion with Dean TV at the moment to perhaps launch a show around homeopathy. I think it's something different that might be coming up. We are used to seeing the normal dentist and doctor on TV at the moment. And this would be something different for our viewers. What's your thoughts around that? Do you think it's a needed show?
I think there's definitely a need for it. I mean, natural health and healthy habits are the next big thing, and people are definitely interested. People want to know more, and they want to hear it from people that are professionals in their field. So what we hope to do is go around and give them the best kind of natural care and natural advice that they could get. So it's a little bit different from the medical shows that's already being presented on Dean TV, but I think people will be very receptive towards it, inshallah.
Fatima, we're looking forward to seeing you on screen and getting some excellent advice from you. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Fatima Paruk, and she's a homeopath, talking to us about the advantages of going to a homeopath. I think something we're going to have on my website. We'll also have office numbers on our screen and we did throughout the show. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.